The wind carried the scent of sage and dust across the cemetery, as Natalie Dawson pressed her forehead against the rough wooden cross marking her mother's grave, her tears falling into the parched earth below. She had ridden 3 days from Salt Lake City to reach Circleville, Utah in the scorching August of 1882, only to find herself too late, her mother already buried beneath the unforgiving ground, and now she sat alone with nothing but grief and the howling emptiness of regret. The sun beat down mercilessly on her black mourning dress, the fabric clinging to her skin as she wept, her shoulders shaking with the force of her sorrow, unaware that someone had approached until she heard the soft creak of leather and felt a presence settle beside her on the hard ground. Natalie did not look up. She could not bear to see pity in a stranger's eyes, could not face the hollow condolences that people offered when they had no idea what to say. But the stranger said nothing at all. He simply sat there, close enough that she could sense his solid presence, far enough to give her space to grieve. Minutes stretched into an hour, and still he remained silent, his breathing steady and calm while hers came in ragged gasps between sobs. Finally, when her tears had run dry and her throat felt raw, Natalie lifted her head and turned to look at the man beside her. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at the edges beneath his worn Stetson. His profile was strong, with a straight nose and a jaw that spoke of determination, and when he sensed her gaze, he turned to meet her eyes. They were a startling shade of blue-green, like the sky just after a storm, and they held no pity, only a deep understanding that made her throat tighten again. "I'm Vincent Vance," he said quietly, his voice roughened by wind and weather. "I knew your mother. She was a good woman." Natalie swallowed hard, her hands twisting in the fabric of her skirt. "I should have come sooner. I should have been here." "She knew you loved her," Vincent said, and there was such certainty in his words that Natalie felt something crack open inside her chest. "She talked about you all the time at the general store, told everyone about her daughter who'd gone to the city to become a school teacher. She was so proud of you. But I wasn't here when she needed me," Natalie whispered, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "She died alone." Vincent shook his head slowly. "She wasn't alone. Mrs. Henderson was with her at the end, and the whole town came to her funeral. Your mother had friends here, Miss Dawson. She had a life that mattered." The words should have comforted her, but instead they made the guilt worse. Natalie had left Circleville 5 years ago, eager to escape the small town and make something of herself in Salt Lake City. She had visited only twice in those 5 years, always too busy with her teaching position, always promising herself she would come next month, next season, next year. And now there would be no next time. "I received the telegram too late," she said, her voice breaking. "By the time I arranged everything and traveled here, she'd already been in the ground for 4 days. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, then he reached out and placed his hand over hers where it rested on her knee. His palm was warm and calloused, the hand of a man who worked hard for his living. She understood. She told Mrs. Henderson that you had important work in the city, that you were helping children learn. That meant everything to her." Natalie looked down at his hand covering hers, at the contrast between his tanned skin and her pale fingers. She should pull away. It was improper for a stranger to touch her like this, but she found she did not want to. His touch was the first genuine comfort she had felt since receiving the devastating news, and she was so tired of being strong, of holding herself together when everything inside her was falling apart. "Why are you here?" she asked softly. "Why did you come sit with me?" Vincent's thumb moved gently across her knuckles, a small gesture that sent warmth spreading through her chest. "Because I know what it's like to grieve alone. When my father died 3 years ago, I sat at his grave for 2 days straight. People came and went, offering words that meant nothing, and all I wanted was for someone to just sit with me and let me feel what I needed to feel. "I'm sorry about your father," Natalie said, finally meeting his eyes again. "And I'm sorry about your mother." He paused, then added, "She really was special. After my father died, she brought food to the ranch every week for months. She'd sit and talk with me while I worked, never asking me how I was doing or telling me it would get better. She just kept me company. I wanted to do the same for you." Something shifted in Natalie's chest, a small easing of the crushing weight that had been pressing down on her since she arrived in Circleville. She had been so focused on her guilt, on her failure to be here when her mother needed her, that she had forgotten her mother had lived a full life even after Natalie left. She had been loved, had been part of a community, had mattered to people. "Thank you," Natalie whispered, "for sitting with me, for telling me that." Vincent squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "Are you staying at the boarding house?" "Yes, Mrs. Mitchell has a room for me." "Good, she'll take care of you." He stood slowly, his joints creaking slightly, and offered her his hand. "Let me walk you back to town. You've been out here in the sun for hours. You need water and rest." Natalie hesitated, looking back at her mother's grave. The thought of leaving felt like abandonment, like she was failing her mother all over again. But Vincent seemed to understand because he said quietly, "She's not really here, you know. This is just where her body rests. Your mother, the woman who raised you and loved you, she's in here." He touched his chest, right over his heart. "That's where you carry her now." The simple wisdom of his words broke through Natalie's resistance. She took his offered hand and let him pull her to her feet. Her legs were stiff from sitting so long, and she stumbled slightly. Vincent's arm came around her waist immediately, steadying her with a care that made her breath catch. "Easy," he murmured. "You're exhausted. When was the last time you ate?" Natalie tried to remember. She had been too sick with grief to eat on the journey from Salt Lake City, and she had come straight to the cemetery when she arrived this morning. "Yesterday, I think. Maybe." Vincent made a disapproving sound in his throat. "We're stopping at the cafe before I take you to Mrs. Mitchell's. You need food." "I'm not hungry," Natalie protested weakly, but her body betrayed her with a sudden wave of dizziness that made her sway. Vincent's arm tightened around her. "You're eating anyway. Come on." He guided her toward the cemetery gate where 2 horses waited, one a sturdy bay gelding and the other a pretty chestnut mare. Vincent helped Natalie onto the mare with gentle efficiency, then swung up onto his own mount. They rode slowly down the dusty main street of Circleville, past the general store and the blacksmith shop, and the small white church where Natalie's mother must have been laid out for her funeral. The town looked exactly as Natalie remembered it, except somehow smaller, as if 5 years in Salt Lake City had changed her perception of what constituted a real place. There were perhaps 24 buildings clustered along the main street, with scattered houses and ranches spreading out into the surrounding valley. The mountains rose in the distance, purple and blue against the fierce August sky, and the Circle Valley spread out before them, a patchwork of farmland and grazing pastures. Vincent dismounted in front of a small building with a painted sign that read "Sally's Cafe," and helped Natalie down from her horse. Inside, the cafe was mercifully cool and dim, and the handful of patrons looked up with curious eyes as they entered. Natalie felt their gazes like brands on her skin. She knew what they were thinking, knew what it looked like for her to arrive with Vincent Vance, the 2 of them alone together, her in mourning clothes. Small-town gossip was one of the reasons she had left in the first place, but Vincent seemed unbothered by the attention. He led her to a table in the corner and pulled out a chair for her with old-fashioned courtesy. "Sally," he called to the woman behind the counter. "Can we get 2 plates of whatever you've got hot and some water?" Sally was a plump woman in her 40s with kind eyes and flour on her apron. She nodded sympathetically at Natalie. "I'm so sorry about your mother, dear. She was a wonderful woman. I'll bring you some roast chicken and potatoes." When the food arrived, Natalie forced herself to eat despite her lack of appetite. Vincent was right that she needed sustenance, and once she started eating, she realized how hungry she actually was. They ate in silence for a while, and Natalie was grateful that Vincent did not try to fill the quiet with meaningless chatter. He seemed comfortable with silence, letting her have the space to process everything that had happened. Finally, when her plate was half empty, Natalie set down her fork and looked at him. "Tell me about the ranch. You said your father died 3 years ago. Do you run it alone now?" Vincent nodded, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "It's just me and a couple of hired hands. We run cattle mostly, some horses. It's not a big operation, but it's enough to make a living." "That must be hard work for one man." "It is," he admitted, "but it's honest work and it's mine. My father built that ranch from nothing, and I'm not about to let it fall apart now that he's gone." There was a fierce pride in his voice that Natalie recognized. It was the same tone she used when talking about her teaching, the same determination to honor what had been given to her. "How old are you?" she asked, then immediately felt her cheeks heat. "I'm sorry, that was rude." Vincent's lips quirked in a small smile, the first she had seen from him. 26, and you don't have to apologize. I'm guessing you're what, 23? 24. 23, Natalie confirmed. "I started teaching when I was 18. That's young to be on your own in a city." "I wasn't completely on my own. I had friends from the normal school, other teachers, and I loved the work." She paused, then added softly, "But I should have come home more often. I should have made time." Vincent reached across the table and covered her hand with his again, that same gentle gesture that had comforted her at the grave. "You can't live your life in should-haves. Trust me, I know. After my father died, I spent months thinking about all the things I should have said to him, all the times I was too busy or too tired to really listen when he tried to talk to me. It ate me alive until I realized that my father wouldn't have wanted that. He would have wanted me to live, to be happy, to make the most of what he'd given me." "How did you stop feeling guilty?" Natalie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't, not completely, but I started focusing on honoring his memory instead of punishing myself for what I couldn't change. I worked hard on the ranch because that's what he would have wanted. I tried to be the kind of man he raised me to be, and slowly, the guilt became something I could live with instead of something that consumed me." Natalie felt tears pricking at her eyes again. "I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to honor her memory when I wasn't even here." "You honor it by living well," Vincent said simply. "By being the woman she raised you to be. By teaching those children and making a difference in their lives. That's what she wanted for you, Natalie. That's what made her proud." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with grief. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just a kind stranger but a man who understood her pain in a way no one else could. A man who had sat beside her in silence when she needed it most, who had fed her and comforted her, and offered her a way to move forward when she felt trapped in her guilt. "How long are you staying in Circleville?" Vincent asked, releasing her hand to pick up his coffee cup. "I don't know," Natalie admitted. "I need to go through my mother's things, settle her affairs. She owned the house, I suppose that's mine now, but I have to be back in Salt Lake City before the school year starts in September. The children depend on me." "That gives you a few weeks then." Natalie nodded. "Yes, I suppose it does." Vincent studied her face for a moment, then said, "I'd like to help you if you'll let me. With your mother's house, I mean. There's probably work that needs doing, things to sort through. It's a lot for one person to handle alone, especially when you're grieving. Part of Natalie wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain her independence and handle everything herself. But she was so tired, and the thought of going through her childhood home alone, of touching her mother's belongings and making decisions about what to keep and what to let go, felt overwhelming. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "You barely know me." "Because your mother helped me when I needed it," Vincent said, "and because I'd like to know you better." The honesty in his words made Natalie's heart skip a beat. There was no artifice in Vincent Vance, no games or manipulation. He said what he meant, and he meant what he said. It was refreshing after the carefully constructed social interactions of Salt Lake City, where everyone was always maneuvering for advantage or maintaining appearances. "I'd appreciate that," Natalie said softly. "Thank you." They finished their meal in a more comfortable silence, and then Vincent walked her to Mrs. Mitchell's boarding house, leading both horses by their reins. The boarding house was a neat two-story building with a wide porch and lace curtains in the windows. Mrs. Mitchell herself answered the door, a stern-looking woman with iron-gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor that Natalie remembered from her childhood. "There you are, Miss Dawson," Mrs. Mitchell said, her voice gruff but not unkind. "I was starting to worry. You've been gone all day." "I'm sorry," Natalie said. "I was at the cemetery." Mrs. Mitchell's expression softened slightly. "Of course you were. Come in, child. I've got your room ready, and there's hot water for washing if you need it." Natalie turned to Vincent, suddenly unsure how to say goodbye to this man who had become so important to her in the span of a few hours. "Thank you again," she said, "for everything." Vincent touched the brim of his hat. "I'll come by tomorrow morning if that's all right. We can go to your mother's house together." "I'd like that." He held her gaze for a moment longer, and Natalie saw something flicker in those blue-green eyes, something that made her pulse quicken. Then he mounted his horse and rode away, and she watched until he disappeared around the corner before following Mrs. Mitchell inside. The boarding house room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the street. Natalie washed the dust and tears from her face and changed out of her mourning dress into a simpler skirt and blouse. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and let herself feel the full weight of the day. Her mother was gone. That fact hit her anew, as devastating as it had been when she first received the telegram. Sarah Dawson, who had raised Natalie alone after her father died when she was just a baby, who had worked her fingers to the bone taking in laundry and mending to pay for Natalie's education, who had encouraged her daughter's dreams even when it meant being left behind, was gone. And Natalie would never get another chance to tell her how much she loved her, how grateful she was for every sacrifice her mother had made. But Vincent's words echoed in her mind. "She's in here. That's where you carry her now." Natalie pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heartbeat beneath her palm, and tried to imagine her mother there, living on in her memories and in the lessons she had taught. It did not erase the pain, but it made it feel slightly more bearable. Sleep did not come easily that night. Natalie lay awake for hours, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the boarding house and the town outside her window. She thought about Vincent Vance, and the way his hand had felt covering hers, the steadiness of his presence and the understanding in his eyes. She thought about the life her mother had built here in Circleville after Natalie left, the friendships she had formed and the community she had been part of. And she thought about her own life in Salt Lake City, the teaching position she loved, and the independence she had fought so hard to achieve. Eventually, exhaustion pulled her under into fitful sleep, and she dreamed of her mother's face, younger and happier, smiling at her the way she had when Natalie was a child. Morning came too soon, announced by the crowing of roosters and the clatter of wagons on the street below. Natalie dressed carefully in a plain dark blue dress that was appropriate for morning but not as severe as the black silk she had worn yesterday. She brushed out her long dark hair and pinned it up in a simple style, then went downstairs to the dining room where Mrs. Mitchell served breakfast to her boarders. Vincent arrived just as Natalie was finishing her coffee and biscuits. He looked freshly washed and shaved, his dark hair still damp, and he carried his hat in his hands as he stepped into the boarding house parlor. Mrs. Mitchell showed him in with a knowing look that made Natalie's cheeks warm. "Good morning," Vincent said, his voice soft. "How did you sleep?" "Not well," Natalie admitted, "but better than I expected. That's something at least." He turned his hat in his hands, a gesture that seemed almost nervous. "Are you ready to go to the house?" Natalie took a deep breath and nodded. She had been dreading this moment, but she also knew she could not put it off forever. Her mother's house needed to be dealt with, and she only had a few weeks before she had to return to Salt Lake City. They walked together through the morning streets of Circleville, Vincent leading his horse and matching his stride to Natalie's slower pace. The house where Natalie had grown up was at the edge of town, a small wooden structure with a peaked roof and a porch that her father had built before his death. The yard was overgrown with weeds, and the paint was peeling in places, but it was still standing, still the home Natalie remembered. Her hands shook as she pulled the key from her reticule, and Vincent gently took it from her and unlocked the door himself. The interior was dim and musty, the curtains drawn against the summer heat. Natalie stepped inside and was immediately overwhelmed by the scent of her mother's lavender soap, the sight of her mother's shawl draped over the back of a chair, the presence of her mother in every corner and surface. She swayed slightly, and Vincent's hand was there at her elbow, steadying her. "Take your time," he murmured. "There's no rush." Natalie nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She moved slowly through the small house, touching things with trembling fingers. Her mother's reading glasses on the table beside her favorite chair. A half-finished piece of mending in a basket by the window. The worn Bible that had belonged to Natalie's grandmother, its pages marked with pressed flowers and scraps of ribbon. In the bedroom, her mother's clothes still hung in the wardrobe, and the bed was made with the same faded quilt that Natalie remembered from her childhood. She sat down on the edge of the mattress and buried her face in her hands, trying not to fall apart again. Vincent sat beside her, close but not touching. "What do you want to do first?" he asked gently. "I don't know," Natalie whispered. "I don't know where to start. How about we start with practical things? Does the house need any repairs? Is there anything that's broken or needs fixing?" Natalie latched onto the concrete suggestion gratefully. Work she could handle, tasks she could accomplish. It was the emotions that threatened to drown her. "The back step has been loose for years," she said, "and I think the roof might leak. Mother mentioned it in one of her letters." "All right. Let me take a look at those things. You can start going through the house, deciding what you want to keep and what you want to give away or sell. We'll work together." They spent the rest of the morning that way, Vincent examining the house for needed repairs, while Natalie began the painful process of sorting through her mother's belongings. She found herself unable to part with much of anything at first. Every item held a memory. Every piece of clothing or scrap of paper seemed precious now that her mother was gone. But Vincent was patient, never rushing her, occasionally offering gentle suggestions or sharing a memory of his own. Around noon, Mrs. Henderson arrived with a basket of food, the older woman's eyes red-rimmed and her voice thick with emotion as she embraced Natalie. "Your mother was my dearest friend," she said. "I miss her terribly." Tell me about her last days, Natalie asked, needing to know even though it hurt. Was she in pain? Mrs. Henderson settled into a chair, her weathered hands folded in her lap. She was sick for about 2 weeks, a fever that just wouldn't break. Doc Miller did everything he could, but her heart gave out in the end. She went peacefully in her sleep. I was sitting with her when it happened. Was she frightened? Natalie's voice cracked. No, dear. She was at peace. She talked about you constantly in those last days, told me stories about when you were little. She said she was so proud of the woman you'd become, that she had no regrets about anything in her life. The only thing she wished for was to see you one more time, to tell you how much she loved you. Tears streamed down Natalie's face. I loved her too. I should have told her more often. She knew, Mrs. Henderson said firmly. Never doubt that she knew. They talked for over an hour, Mrs. Henderson sharing stories about Natalie's mother that made her laugh through her tears. She learned that her mother had been part of a ladies' quilting circle, that she had sung in the church choir, that she had been known for her kindness and her willingness to help anyone in need. It painted a picture of a full, rich life that eased some of Natalie's guilt about leaving. When Mrs. Henderson finally left, Natalie returned to her sorting with renewed purpose. Vincent had been working outside, repairing the loose step and examining the roof, and when he came back in, his shirt was damp with sweat and there was dirt on his hands. The roof needs some patching, he reported. I can do it this afternoon if you want. The step is fixed already. You don't have to do all this, Natalie said, though she was grateful for his help. Don't you have work at your ranch? My men can handle things for a few days. This is important. He paused, then added quietly, You're important. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Natalie felt her heart begin to race, felt something shift and settle in her chest. She had known this man for less than 24 hours, but already he felt essential to her. Already she could not imagine going through this ordeal without him by her side. Thank you, she whispered. Vincent held her gaze for a long moment, then cleared his throat and looked away. I should get started on that roof. Do you need anything before I climb up there? No, I'm fine. Thank you. She watched him go, then turned back to the task at hand. By the time the sun began to set, they had made significant progress. Vincent had patched the roof and repaired several other small problems around the house, while Natalie had sorted through most of her mother's clothing and personal items. She had decided to donate the clothes to families in need, knowing her mother would have approved, and to keep only a few special pieces for herself. They ate a simple dinner together in the house, food that Mrs. Henderson had left in her basket, and then Vincent walked Natalie back to the boarding house as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Will you come back tomorrow? Natalie asked as they stood on the porch of Mrs. Mitchell's place. If you want me to, I do. She hesitated, then added, I don't think I could do this without you, Vincent. He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. You're stronger than you think, Natalie Dawson, but I'm glad I can help. That night, Natalie slept better, exhausted from the physical and emotional work of the day. And when morning came, Vincent was waiting for her again, steady and reliable as the sunrise. They fell into a pattern over the next week. Vincent would arrive in the morning, and they would work together at the house, gradually transforming it from a shrine to Natalie's mother into something that could be sold or rented out. They talked while they worked, sharing stories about their lives and their dreams. Natalie learned that Vincent loved the ranch, but sometimes felt lonely out there by himself, that he had a younger sister who had married and moved to Colorado, that he could play the guitar and sing, though he was shy about it. Vincent learned that Natalie loved teaching but missed the open spaces of Circleville, that she had always been curious about everything, and used to drive her mother crazy with endless questions as a child, that she could bake the best apple pie in 3 counties according to her mother's recipe. As they worked and talked, Natalie felt herself growing closer to Vincent in a way that both thrilled and frightened her. She found herself watching him when he did not know she was looking, admiring the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt when he lifted something heavy, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the gentleness of his hands despite their calluses and strength. And she saw the way he looked at her too, when he thought she was not paying attention, saw the warmth in his gaze, the careful way he touched her hand when passing her something, the protectiveness in his stance when other men from town came by to offer their condolences. One afternoon, as they were cleaning out the small barn behind the house, Natalie asked the question that had been on her mind for days. "Why aren't you married, Vincent? A man like you must have had plenty of opportunities." Vincent paused in the act of stacking old crates, his back to her. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "I was engaged once, about 4 years ago, to a girl named Mary Sullivan, but she decided she didn't want to be a rancher's wife after all. She left Circleville and married a shopkeeper in Beaver." "I'm sorry," Natalie said softly. He turned to face her, leaning against the barn wall. "I'm not anymore. If she couldn't love the ranch the way I do, couldn't see the value in what I'm trying to build, then we wouldn't have been happy together. I want someone who understands that the land is part of who I am, someone who can love both me and the life I've chosen." Natalie's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "And have you found anyone like that?" Vincent pushed away from the wall and crossed the barn to stand in front of her. He was so close she could see the flecks of gold in his blue-green eyes, could smell the scent of leather and hay and summer sun that clung to him. "I think I might have," he said quietly. "But I don't know if she could be happy here, or if her life is in the city now." Natalie's breath caught. She knew he was talking about her, knew this was the moment when everything would change between them. "What if she doesn't know what she wants anymore?" she whispered. "What if coming back here has made her question everything she thought was important? Then I'd tell her to take her time, to figure out what her heart really wants. And I'd hope that maybe, when she did, there might be a place for me in whatever future she chooses." They stood there for a long moment, the air between them electric with possibility. Then, slowly, Vincent raised his hand and cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing gently across her skin. Natalie closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, and when she felt his lips brush against hers, soft and questioning, she kissed him back with all the longing and confusion and hope that had been building inside her. The kiss deepened, Vincent's arms coming around her to pull her close, and Natalie melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt as she kissed him back with a desperation that surprised her. She had been kissed before, brief stolen moments with boys at dances or after church socials, but nothing had ever felt like this. Nothing had ever made her feel like she was coming home and setting out on an adventure all at the same time. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you, Natalie Dawson," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know it's too soon. I know you're grieving and confused, but I can't help it. These past few days with you have been the best of my life." Natalie felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of grief this time. "I'm falling in love with you too," she admitted, "and it terrifies me because I don't know what to do about it. My life is in Salt Lake City. My students need me. But when I think about leaving Circleville, about leaving you, it feels like I'm tearing myself in half." Vincent pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "Then don't decide right now. You still have time before you need to go back. Let's just take these days as they come and see where they lead us." No promises, no pressure. Just you and me getting to know each other. It was sensible advice, the kind of careful approach that Natalie's rational mind approved of. But her heart wanted more, wanted promises and certainty and a future she could count on. Still, she knew Vincent was right. She was too raw with grief to make life-changing decisions, and it would not be fair to either of them to rush into something when her emotions were so tangled and overwhelming. "All right," she agreed softly. "We'll take it slow." But even as she said the words, Natalie knew it was a lie. There was nothing slow about what she felt for Vincent Vance. She was already in love with him, already imagining a future that included his steady presence and gentle strength. The question was not whether she loved him, but whether she was brave enough to choose that love over the life she had built in Salt Lake City. They finished cleaning the barn in a companionable silence, the air between them charged with new awareness. When evening came and Vincent walked her back to the boarding house, he kissed her again on Mrs. Mitchell's porch, a slow, sweet kiss that left Natalie dizzy and aching for more. "Tomorrow," he promised, touching her cheek one more time before he left. "Tomorrow," she agreed, watching him ride away into the gathering dusk. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of work and wonder. Natalie and Vincent spent nearly every day together, finishing the work on her mother's house and spending long hours simply talking and being together. He took her riding in the mountains, showing her the beauty of Circle Valley from high above, and she read to him from her mother's favorite books in the evenings, their voices mingling in the quiet house. They kissed often, stolen moments of passion that left them both breathless and wanting more. But Vincent was always careful to maintain propriety, never pushing Natalie further than she was ready to go. He respected her, cherished her, and that reverence made her love him even more. She met his ranch hands, 2 grizzled cowboys named Pete and Charlie who treated Vincent with obvious respect and affection. She saw the ranch he was so proud of, the neat fences and well-tended pastures, the sturdy house his father had built with his own hands. And she could see herself there, could imagine making a life in that house with Vincent, waking up to the sight of the mountains and the sound of cattle lowing in the distance. But she also thought about her students in Salt Lake City, the children who depended on her to teach them and guide them. She thought about the independence she had fought so hard to achieve, the respect she had earned as a teacher. Could she give all that up for love? Could she turn her back on 5 years of work and sacrifice to become a rancher's wife? The question tormented her as the days slipped past and the end of August approached. She needed to be back in Salt Lake City by the first week of September, which gave her less than a week to make a decision that would determine the course of the rest of her life. One evening, as they sat together on the porch of her mother's house watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Vincent finally broached the subject they had been avoiding. "You're going back soon," he said quietly, his hand wrapped around hers. "Yes, I have to. School starts in a week." "I know." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I don't want you to go, Natalie. I want you to stay here with me, but I also know that's not a decision I can make for you." Natalie felt her throat tighten. "What if I can't choose? What if both options feel right and wrong at the same time?" Vincent turned to face her, his expression serious. "Then I'll tell you what your mother told me when I was trying to decide whether to keep the ranch or sell it after my father died. She said that sometimes the right choice is the one that scares you more, because that means you care about it deeply. She said fear is not always a warning to stay away. Sometimes it's a sign that you're on the verge of something important." "Staying here scares me," Natalie admitted. "Giving up teaching, giving up my independence, relying on someone else for my security, all of that terrifies me. And going back to Salt Lake City. Does that scare you too?" Natalie thought about it, really examined her feelings. "Yes," she said slowly. "It scares me because it means losing you. It means going back to a life that suddenly feels empty and hollow compared to what I've found here. It means choosing safety over love, and I don't know if I can live with that." Vincent squeezed her hand. "You wouldn't have to give up everything, you know. Circleville has a school too. It's small, just one room, but we need a teacher. Old Miss Pritchard has been talking about retiring for years. You could teach here, have your independence and your work, and still be with me." Hope flared in Natalie's chest, bright and fierce. "Really? The school needs a teacher." "Talk to Reverend Patterson tomorrow. He's on the school board. I'm sure they'd be thrilled to have someone with your qualifications." It seemed too good to be true, a solution that would allow her to have both the work she loved and the man she had come to cherish. But doubt crept in immediately. "What about my students in Salt Lake City? I can't just abandon them." "You're not abandoning them. You're finishing your contract and then moving on. Teachers do that all the time. They'll find someone else and those children will be fine." "But if you walk away from what we have, Natalie, I don't think either of us will ever be fine again." His words struck her like a physical blow, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. She had been trying to convince herself that she could go back to her old life and forget Vincent Vance, that what they had shared these past few weeks was just a temporary comfort born of grief. But she knew, deep in her soul, that Vincent was right. If she left him, she would regret it for the rest of her life. "I love you," she said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I love you so much it terrifies me. I've never felt this way about anyone, never wanted something so badly that I'm willing to change my entire life for it." Vincent's face broke into a smile so wide and joyful that it took her breath away. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest as he rained kisses on her hair, her forehead, her cheeks. "I love you too," he said between kisses. "God, Natalie, I love you so much. Stay with me. Make a life with me here. I promise I'll spend every day making sure you never regret it." "Yes," Natalie whispered, tears streaming down her face, but these were tears of joy, of relief, of rightness. "Yes, I'll stay. I'll talk to Reverend Patterson tomorrow, and I'll write to the school in Salt Lake City and tell them I won't be returning. I'll stay here with you." Vincent kissed her then, a deep, passionate kiss that sealed their promises to each other. And when they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying at the same time, Natalie felt a sense of peace settle over her that she had not experienced since before her mother died. This was right. This was where she was meant to be. The next morning, Natalie met with Reverend Patterson, a kindly older man with white hair and a warm smile. He was delighted by her offer to teach at the Circleville school and immediately convened an emergency meeting of the school board. By that afternoon, Natalie had been officially hired as the new teacher, starting at the beginning of September. She sent a telegram to Salt Lake City, informing the school administrators that she would not be returning and recommending several qualified teachers who could take her place. It felt strange to sever that connection, to let go of the life she had built there, but it also felt liberating. She was choosing her own path, not following someone else's expectations or trying to prove that she could make it on her own. She was choosing love, and that was the bravest thing she had ever done. Vincent proposed properly that evening, going down on one knee in the parlor of her mother's house with a simple gold band that had belonged to his grandmother. Natalie said yes through happy tears, and they decided to be married in the little white church where her mother had worshipped, with the whole town invited to witness their union. The wedding took place on the last Saturday of August, a beautiful clear day with a soft breeze that carried the scent of late summer flowers. Natalie wore a dress of cream-colored silk that she had brought from Salt Lake City, altered slightly by Mrs. Henderson to be more fashionable. Vincent wore his best suit, his dark hair slicked back and his face clean-shaven, and when Natalie walked down the aisle on the arm of old Doc Miller, who had been a friend to her mother, she thought she had never seen a more handsome man. They spoke their vows before God and the community, promising to love and cherish each other in sickness and health, in plenty and want, as long as they both lived. And when Vincent slipped the gold ring onto Natalie's finger and kissed her as his wife for the first time, she felt her mother's presence there with them, approving and joyful. The reception was held at the church social hall, with tables laden with food that the townspeople had brought and fiddle music for dancing. Natalie danced with Vincent until her feet ached, laughing and spinning in his arms, and then danced with the other men of Circleville who wanted to congratulate the new bride. But her eyes always returned to Vincent, to the man who had sat beside her in her darkest moment and shown her that love could bloom even in the midst of grief. As the sun began to set, Vincent whisked Natalie away from the celebration and helped her onto his horse. They rode out to his ranch, which was now their ranch, their home, and Vincent carried her over the threshold of the house that would be theirs for the rest of their lives. That night, in the big bed that had been his father's and was now theirs, Vincent made love to Natalie with a tenderness and passion that brought tears to her eyes. He was patient and careful, mindful that this was her first time, and he whispered words of love and devotion as he showed her the depths of pleasure that could exist between a husband and wife. And when they lay tangled together in the aftermath, Natalie's head on Vincent's chest and his arms around her, she knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. The years that followed were not without their challenges. Ranch life was hard, and there were seasons of drought and illness that tested them. But Vincent and Natalie faced everything together, their love deepening with each passing year. Natalie threw herself into teaching at the Circleville school, loving her students and finding fulfillment in watching them grow and learn. She started a lending library in the church basement and organized spelling bees and recitals that became annual events the whole town looked forward to. Vincent's ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. Natalie had a head for figures and helped him manage the finances more efficiently, and together they made improvements that increased their herd and their profits. They hired more hands as the operation grew, and Vincent's reputation as a fair and honest rancher spread throughout the valley. 2 years after their wedding, Natalie gave birth to their first child, a son they named Samuel after Vincent's father. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when both Natalie and the baby's lives hung in the balance. But Doc Miller saw them through, and when Natalie held her son for the first time, she thought her heart would burst with love and gratitude. Samuel was followed by a daughter, Grace, 2 years later, and then another son, Thomas, 3 years after that. The house that had seemed spacious when it was just Natalie and Vincent became cheerfully crowded with children's laughter and the chaos of family life. Natalie taught her children to read before they started school, and Vincent taught them to ride and rope and care for the animals. Together, they raised their children to be kind and hardworking, to value honesty and integrity above material success. On quiet evenings, after the children were in bed, Natalie and Vincent would sit together on the porch, watching the stars come out over the mountains, and talk about their day and their dreams. Vincent would play his guitar and sing softly, and Natalie would lean against his shoulder and think about how blessed she was to have found this life, this love. She often visited her mother's grave, bringing flowers and sitting beside the wooden cross to talk to the woman who had given her life and shaped her into the person she had become. And she always thought of Vincent sitting beside her that first day, offering silent comfort when she needed it most, and she thanked God and her mother for bringing them together. As the years passed, Circleville grew and changed. The railroad came through in 1890, bringing new opportunities and new challenges. The school expanded to 2 rooms, and Natalie hired a young teacher fresh from normal school to help with the growing number of students. Vincent served on the town council and worked to bring improvements to the community, always with Natalie's wisdom and support guiding his decisions. Their children grew up strong and capable. Samuel inherited his father's love of ranching and took over more and more of the daily operations as Vincent got older. Grace became a teacher like her mother, taking a position in the neighboring town of Marysville, but coming home often to visit. Thomas showed an aptitude for business and eventually opened a successful mercantile in Circleville, marrying a sweet girl named Emma and giving Vincent and Natalie their first grandchildren. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Vincent surprised Natalie with a trip to Salt Lake City, just the 2 of them. It was strange to return to the city where she had once built her life, to see how much it had changed and grown. They visited the school where she had taught, and Natalie was pleased to find it thriving under new leadership. But she felt no regret for the life she had left behind. Her heart was in Circleville, with Vincent and their children and the community they had helped build. Standing in the hotel room that night, looking out over the gaslit streets of Salt Lake City, Natalie turned to Vincent and said, "Thank you for giving me a life I never knew I wanted." Vincent pulled her into his arms, his hair now streaked with silver but his eyes still the same startling blue-green that had captivated her so many years ago. "Thank you for choosing me," he said softly, "for choosing us. Every day I wake up beside you, I count myself the luckiest man alive." They kissed, a sweet familiar kiss that still had the power to make Natalie's heart race after all these years. And she knew that she would never stop being grateful for that August day in 1882, when she had sat crying at her mother's grave, and a cowboy had sat beside her without saying a word, offering exactly what she needed when she needed it most. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows. They lost Pete to old age and saw Charlie finally retire to live with his daughter in Nevada. They welcomed more grandchildren into the family, a whole passel of them who filled the ranch with noise and laughter during holidays and summer visits. They weathered economic depressions and celebrated prosperity, always together, always united in their commitment to each other and the life they had built. When Natalie finally retired from teaching at the age of 55, the town threw her a celebration that rivaled their wedding reception. Former students came from all over Utah to honor the woman who had shaped their lives and opened their minds to the possibilities of education. There were speeches and testimonials, and Natalie cried happy tears as she realized the impact she had made on her small corner of the world. Vincent retired from active ranching around the same time, turning the operation over to Samuel while he and Natalie enjoyed a slower pace of life. They traveled a bit, visiting Grace in Marysville and taking a trip to Colorado to see Vincent's sister, who they had not seen in years. But they always came home to Circleville, to the house that held all their memories and the land that had sustained them. On a warm evening in the summer of 1920, 38 years after they first met, Natalie and Vincent sat together on their porch, surrounded by children and grandchildren who had gathered for a family reunion. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in those same shades of gold and crimson that Natalie remembered from the evening Vincent had proposed. She looked around at all the faces, at the family they had created together, and felt a deep contentment settle over her. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had gone back to Salt Lake City?" she asked Vincent quietly, her hand clasped in his. Vincent squeezed her fingers gently. "Not really. I think we were always meant to find each other, meant to build this life together. Your mother brought us together in a way. Her kindness to me, her death that brought you back to Circleville at exactly the right time. It all led us to each other." "I miss her still," Natalie said softly, "even after all these years. I know you do. But she lives on in you, in our children, in all the students you taught over the years. Her legacy is everywhere, Natalie. You made sure of that." Natalie leaned her head on Vincent's shoulder, watching their grandchildren play in the yard as the evening shadows lengthened. "I couldn't have done any of it without you. We did it together," Vincent corrected gently. "That's what marriage is, building something together that's bigger and better than anything either of us could have created alone." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, the same stars that had watched over them for nearly 4 decades. And Natalie thought about the young woman she had been, crying at her mother's grave and feeling like her world had ended. She could not have imagined then the life that was waiting for her, could not have conceived of the love and joy and fulfillment that would be hers. But Vincent had seen her potential even in her darkest moment. He had sat beside her and offered silent comfort, and from that simple act of kindness, an entire lifetime of love had grown. As the family began to head inside for the evening meal that Natalie and her daughters had prepared, Vincent helped Natalie to her feet. They stood together on the porch, arms around each other, looking out over the ranch that was their legacy and the family that was their greatest achievement. "I love you, Natalie Vance," Vincent said, using the name she had carried for 38 years. "Every day more than the day before." "And I love you, Vincent Vance," Natalie replied, turning to kiss him softly. "For now and always, until the stars fall from the sky." They went inside together, hand in hand as they had been since that first day when he had taken her hand at the cemetery and helped her stand. And though they did not know it then, they would have many more years together, growing old side by side, their love never dimming but only deepening as the seasons turned, and life continued its beautiful, inevitable march forward. When Vincent finally passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82, Natalie grieved as she had grieved for her mother all those years ago. But this time, she had her children and grandchildren around her, offering comfort and support. And she knew that Vincent was not truly gone, that he lived on in her heart, and in the family they had created, and in every inch of the ranch that bore the mark of his hard work and dedication. She lived another 5 years without him, years filled with the love of family and the satisfaction of a life well lived. And when her own time came, she went peacefully, surrounded by those she loved, confident that she would be reunited with Vincent and her mother in whatever lay beyond. They buried Natalie beside Vincent in the Circleville cemetery, not far from her mother's grave. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the sage and the sun set over the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, people passing by sometimes thought they could see 2 figures sitting together by the graves, hand in hand, just as they had been in life. Silent and content, united in death as they had been in life, proof that true love, once found, never truly ends.